So, Outer Wilds is pretty cool. Honestly, it was one of my favorite video game experiences of all time. The sense of fear and wonder I got from exploring space and discovering everything about how the planets work and who the Nomai were is a feeling I hadn't really experienced before. Except for maybe one time. I went to Disneyland for the first time a couple years ago, and looking back on it, the same sensations of fear and excitement I experienced in Outer Wilds, I experienced going on Splash Mountain for the first time, going on Mission Breakout for the first time. These Disney rides had me feeling the same way I felt while playing Outer Wilds. The more I thought about it, the more I thought that the world of Outer Wilds could work really, really well as a Disney ride. So here it is, my concept for a ride at Disney based on the world of Outer Wilds. One of my favorite things about a lot of Disney rides is how they follow small little stories while taking you through the ride. So naturally, this hypothetical Outer Wilds ride would have to have one too. The only thing though, the actual story of Outer Wilds, the Dead Nomai, the Ash Twin Project, the Eye of the Universe, just all that stuff, it'd be incredibly hard to adapt into a minute and a half uncontrollable ride. So I didn't. Enter the Outer Wilds Ventures Space Tour, a new branch of Outer Wilds Ventures that allows the citizens of Timberhearth, or in this case the patrons at Disneyland, to explore the solar system en masse. Led by an intrepid Hearthian guide, the passengers are promised a marvelous look at all the major bodies in the solar system, except for Dark Bramble for obvious reasons. The guide here would either be just one of the founding members of Outer Wilds Ventures, except Feldspar, but you'll see why later, or just the player character. It doesn't really matter since the passengers would only see them at the beginning of the ride when they give the passengers a little rundown of what the tour entails. Speaking of what the tour entails, let's get into some of the tour's details. So the tour starts with the guide describing the path of the ship, telling the riders what planets they're going to go to and in what order. Hourglass Twins, Brittle Hollow, Giant Steep. As the guide finishes his speech, a Nomai statue that's in the room with the passengers suddenly opens its eyes, recording the memories of everyone before they take off. The guide's a little freaked out by this, but he continues on anyway. He's not super phased. The riders load up into their ship, and with the voice of the guide over like a PA radio system, the ship takes off. As the ship leaves the atmosphere of Timberhearth, the guide mentions the Attlerock and Esker, which the passengers can clearly see. The guide would also pull out the signal scope here, and then the passengers can hear Esker's whistling as well. The ship passes them by though and continues towards their first destination, the Hourglass Twins. The ship approaches but slows down, not getting too close to the planets. The guide explains that this is due to their mass and doesn't want them to get pulled into the sun. As they orbit near the twins, the guide explains their unique function, and the passengers can hear Churt's drums. The guide explains studying the stars. The guide then excitedly tells the crew that they've seen enough of the Hourglass Twins, and says they're on their way to Brittle Hollow. The ship makes its way with no issues, and the passengers get to see Hollow's lantern as the guide tells them they're going to go underneath the crust to see the Hanging City, and hopefully Ryback. He also tells them to not mind the massive black hole underneath, and that's nothing to worry about. The ship slowly lowers itself underneath the crust, and the passengers get a good look at the city underneath, and get to see Ryback just chilling and playing his banjo. But whoopsies, turns out the guide was too busy observing the architecture to notice Hollow's lantern, and the ship gets hit with a meteor, falling dramatically into the black hole. Fortunately for the passengers, this black hole doesn't lead to a horrifying death, and instead simply plunks the ship down on the other side of the solar system. Nothing too major. The guide, after screaming as the ship fell into the black hole, catches their breath and lets the crew know that the ship hasn't been damaged too badly. The crew then spots Giant Steep, and the guide says the tour can continue as normal. So the ship safely enters the atmosphere of Giant Steep, and the passengers get to see the hurricanes and watch an island get launched into space. The guide then points to Gabbro chilling and playing the flute, asking him to wave back, which of course he doesn't. The guide says something like, it's typical Gabbro, as Gabbro suddenly jumps up and starts pointing to something outside of the passenger's view. The guide is confused for a moment, but he turns the ship just in time to see the hurricane that picks them up and throws them into space. The guide screams that he's lost control of the ship, and that, they're heading for Dark Bramble. Why did I write whoa? So like a couple seconds after the guide says they're about to fall into Dark Bramble, the passengers enter the first node. The guide freaks out a little bit and urges all of the passengers to stay quiet while he tries to fix the ship. While drifting, the ship passes two massive anglerfish, who don't really seem to notice as the ship is still dead silent, relying 100% on momentum. The signal scope is still out though, and the passengers can hear a faint harmonica from time to time. After a couple seconds have passed with the ship just barely drifting by, the guide exclaims, "Got it!" and their engines burst to life, alerting the nearby anglerfish. The guide says something like, where's the way out of here? As who else but the legend themselves, Feldspar, flies in to show the passengers the way out. As the lights get brighter around the ship and an anglerfish comes in from the side, the crew escapes from another node, this one leading to the portal back on Timberhearth. Yeah, you know the little one back on Timberhearth? Nope, that's big now, sorry. The ship slows to a crawl as it gently hovers past the other astronauts, just chilling by a fire, playing their instruments. The guide breathes a sigh of relief and begins to thank the passengers for their bravery, being the first to take the tour. However, in a cruel twist of fate, as the guide is finishing his congratulatory speech, the song that plays before time resets starts to fade in. Before anyone can realize what's happening, a blue-white light envelops everyone around before everything goes black. And the ride ends. Obviously, this doesn't really follow the canon too much. There was never a space tour in the game, but I think this is a fun and simple story to follow, and let people experience both the terrors and wonders of the world without having to understand too much of the source material. It'd also just be good for getting a bunch of people onto a cart and having a general story they can all follow without focusing too much on the individual. But if you can think of a cooler or more faithful storyline for the ride, please leave a comment with your idea. I would actually love to hear about it. Mine's not very good. Anyway, enough about the story though. Let's get into some aesthetics. So obviously the ride itself, as it takes place mostly in space, is going to be super dark, the only light coming from the sun while traveling, and when a cart enters a planet's atmosphere. As well, when in space, all the planets should be orbiting the sun and should more or less be visible at all times, depending on the angle of the quote-unquote ship. Depending on the planet, I think there should be some like cool 4D effects. Think like the fog wall when you enter Pirates of the Caribbean, about being repurposed as the outer atmospheric layer for Giant's Deep. And when you enter, I know you're in a spaceship, but I don't care. This is supposed to be fun. You get sprayed with mists to like really sell the feeling of being on the planet. There would also be some other cool details just around the ride. For instance, when orbiting the Hourglass Twins, if you're really observant, you can see the sun station orbiting the sun. Or when you're in the Dark Bramble section, the observant passengers out there can spot the vessel if you look closely enough. Then on every planet with an escape pod, you can see those. And when traveling Giant's Deep, the passengers can see the Interloper pass by. And when the cart is in space, there's a random chance for each little scene of that for the Quantum Moon to randomly appear orbiting a planet. So every time you go on the ride, it would be a different spot every time. But of course, everyone's favorite part of Disneyland isn't the aesthetics of the ride, it's the aesthetics of the lineups. And what else could the lead up to the Outer Wilds ride be except for the village of Timber Hearth? Except the beginning. The beginning of the lineup, to coincide with the end of the ride, is a long dark corridor with a Nomai mask on one end, purple light streaming towards the entrance, pictures of the ride showing up on the walls, just to like emulate the reawakening scene every time you start a loop. After that, then it's the village. The line would pass through the village, showing off some of the houses, some citizens, some geysers, and ghost matter, until the line reaches the museum. In here, the people in the line will get to see the model solar system, the anglerfish specimen, and a small room with lights that turn on and off, a quantum rock moving around it. After this, the riders will be ushered into the guides room, which will probably just be some offshoot of the museum, and just have a little more like, just a couple more like knickknacks around there, and have the big Nomai statue in it. The Nomai statue will glare at them, and then they'll be out onto the loading area, which is just like a grassy little knoll with like a spaceship in the middle, and it frickin' flies away, and it's cool. It's cool. It's gonna be super cool. Mechanics. We're talking about mechanics. So I'm no engineer, but I'm going to try my best to make sense of a way this ride could work. Let's start with the easiest ones, loading and unloading. I think the loading area would be right after the little introduction scene with the guide. After getting a group of people somewhat sorted with the first room, then they would all wait on the launch pad area just outside the museum and wait to board their cart. They would then go through the ride, have just a fantastic time, and then unload in another room right after the sun's explosion scene. The cart would then loop back around to the starting area, creating a constant cycle of just like going of the ride. It would just create the cycle of the ride. So okay, now that that's out of the way, how the hell are we actually going to pull off this ride? At first, I thought going the route of the Harry Potter ride at Universal would be the best bet, as the tech they use with like the big ass screen and it simulates flight really well. But then I remember how motion sick it made everyone I rode it with, and decided it probably wasn't the best idea if I want the most people possible to enjoy the ride. So that leaves me with option 2. Tangible decorations and smaller projections. I think a lot of the scenes where the passengers are in space would need to be done with projections and perspective manipulation, which is something that Disney is already super familiar with, using like the Tower of Terror and the Haunted Mansion, among others. This would probably be the case just because trying to emulate the vastness of space in a tiny little room would probably be an extremely hard thing to do with just models. That being said, models still might work, the effects just probably wouldn't be as convincing or inspire the sensations that they're supposed to. I think the majority of the on-planet scenes can be accomplished with models and set pieces though, just due to them being more confined by default. Wow, who'd have thought that a planet would be easier to condense than the entire vastness of space. I'd really like for all the other astronauts, like Ryback and like Chert, to all be animatronics, and you meet them at the end as well, just to add to that like Disney charm. I think having the anglerfish as models and animatronics would also really add to that sense of tangibility and make them a lot more dangerous. But just saying, please take all these statements with a grain of salt. Like I said, I'm no engineer. I only have a very slight understanding of how the rides at Disney work, and I have no idea like whether or not this is realistic. And I know that I said you should take that with a grain of salt, but with my like suggestions going forward, take them with a massive 3-kilogram brick of salt. Because at this point, I have like no idea how realistic my ideas sound. So just be forewarned, I kind of sound like a total dumbass going forward. So for the actual cart and track themselves, I thought something that uses like a gyroscopic system where like the cart can like tilt and whirl, and it's like that would just simulate the way a spaceship moves. Like as accurately as possible. But I imagine it would be really hard to get working for more than like 2 people at a time, and also require a ton of maintenance. So I just scrapped that and move on. The other system that I thought could maybe work would be like connected cylindrical rooms that would allow the cart to orbit something in the middle before being moved to a different room via connecting tracks. The cylindrical rooms would be able to drop and raise rapidly depending on the situation, and the rails would like automatically connect when they reached a certain height, and then would allow for the cart to move on. Of course, these are like not without their flaws. I don't think they would really work well for the story that I pitched earlier, and they probably wouldn't even be feasible at all. So if you have any big brain ideas on how to get a decent system working for this ride, leave it in the comments. That'd be super cool to hear about. So I think that about does it for this freaking mess of a ride. Of course, these are just my ideas of what I thought would work well. Outer Wilds isn't going to get a ride at Disneyland ever, so it's not like these ideas really matter anyway, but I thought this would just be a cool concept. I really believe that the world and feel of Outer Wilds could translate incredibly well into a story-driven Disneyland ride. Scary and cozy, daunting and whimsical. These are the qualities I think these two vastly different experiences share. In a perfect world, Outer Wilds would get a lot more mainstream coverage, getting the attention it deserves. In a perfect world, a little indie game by a little development studio could become something massive. In a perfect world, the gift shop after the ride would sell kazoos. Thank you for watching.